Tech troll Elon Musk is pulling out all the stops to push his lame horse, Donald Trump, across the finish line. Musk has continued doling out the million-dollar checks to registered swing state voters who signed his pro-Trump petition. The DOJ confirmed to NBC News that it has received a letter from a former DOJ official, from former DOJ officials and former Republican lawmakers urging an investigation into whether Musk is violating a federal statute prohibiting paying people to register to vote. And perhaps worse is that over the weekend, Musk yet again joked about the assassination of Vice President Kamala Harris, and at a church, no less.
I mentioned as a joke, I meant it as a joke, that no one's even bothering to try to kill Kamala, because there's no point. There's no point, is what just get another puppet, So I'm not suggesting someone should try to kill her. It's pointless. But I'm just saying, I'm just making an observation. Nobody's bothered. Why is that? Because it doesn't matter. Yeah, assassinating a puppet is pointless.
Talking about the assassination of anyone, let alone the sitting vice president, is not a joke. It's dark stuff and something he's talked about multiple times since first posting about it and then deleting it last month. And he's not just another Twitter troll. He is the owner of one of the world's largest online platforms, a U.S. defense contractor whose Starlink system is being used in current wars, and the chief animating force of the Trump campaign at this point. Beyond hitting the trail for Trump, a Musk-backed group has largely taken over Trump's ground operation in crucial battleground states, even though, as The Guardian is reporting, some of those canvassers are faking their efforts. Musk is also bankrolling the Trump campaign, having invested $75 million in his pro-Trump PAC in just the last 3 months. And in a new fundraising ad this morning, the campaign says Musk will match every dollar that is raised from the ad. And if you wonder why Musk would go to such lengths for a man who seems more interested in speaking about the genitalia of a dead golfer than providing actual policy, it's a good question. And here's the answer. If Trump were to win, he has said that he would make Musk part of his administration, leading a government efficiency commission. That means the man who has had over $15 billion in government contracts over the past decade, including from the Defense Department, and who is facing investigations and oversight from all corners of the government, could now be given oversight over those very agencies. It all fits into Trump's talk of bringing the country back to the Gilded Age, where a handful of the ultra-wealthy acted like oligarchs running the country. In addition to Musk, you have another tech billionaire, Peter Thiel, who has an ownership interest in Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. It should scare us all that these billionaires would have unfettered access to Trump and Vance and could operate them like marionettes should they win. Joining me now is Hugo Lowell, senior political correspondent for The Guardian, and Anand Giridharadas, MSNBC political analyst and publisher of the newsletter The Ink on Substack. Hugo, let me start with you. Give me the extent of Elon Musk's involvement in, and I guess you could say control over the Trump campaign.
It's really extensive. I mean, if you think about this election and how close it is, basically the result is going to come down to turnout, and the entity that's got the biggest presence on the ground in all of the battleground states is Elon Musk's America PAC. I mean, as you noted in the intro there, America PAC is effectively doing the bulk of the Trump campaign's groundwork. And the way I was thinking about it was, he's basically put $75 million into the America PAC operation, and he basically now has a way to go back to Trump, regardless of what happens, to say, it was all because of me. If Trump wins, Elon Musk is going to have an outsized influence in Trump's orbit in a way that I don't think anyone else to date has had, purely by virtue of the amount of money that Elon Musk has spent here. And on the flip side, if Trump doesn't win, he will have demonstrated to the Republican Party that he is basically enabled to become a kingmaker down the road, whether it's 2026, 2028. If there is a Republican candidate that Elon Musk wants to back, he has shown through this cycle he has the means and the wherewithal to try and figure out how to do it. And I think that's where we're headed with Musk.
Anand, neither Peter Thiel nor Elon Musk can run for president. They were both born in South Africa. But they essentially have 2/3 of the control of a potential next president and vice president. Between them and one other billionaire, they've given the bulk of the money that Donald Trump is spending in this election. And he's now also controlling their ground game. This strikes me as incredibly dangerous open oligarchy, but I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, and you were talking in the last segment about, how locked in people are to their tribes and how hard it is to break through. But there's a lot of research about the only thing that does break through is actually explaining to people how they are manipulated, right? That actually does break through. So I wrote a book about billionaires and how they run this country and the very clever methods they've used. Let me break down the Musk move here. First of all, you have to understand, and you can see that in the clip you showed, like a lot of men in Silicon Valley, this is a highly personally limited man. Right? This is a person who, if he were in a room with you, would be probably the least comfortable person in that room, just not particularly equipped at understanding people. When he makes comments about society, they just sound very high school child speculating about the world without having lived in it, even though he's middle-aged. He's also someone who lost a relationship with his daughter because he was so attached to his own ideas and his own ideology that he couldn't let her be who she became. Very few parents love some idea more than their own child, but this is the kind of limited man we're talking about. And he's someone who's very disoriented by progress in the future. Okay, so that's the billionaire. What they then do, because there's a very small number of them, and in a democracy, their paucity would be a problem, is that they then need to get a bunch of human shields to associate their interests, their regular lunch pail, lunch bucket, union stiff interests with that highly limited billionaire man. And the way they do that is by ginning up these issues of outrage, of culture, whatever, that somehow are meant to dupe, specifically, I think with Elon Musk, America's men, to come to their side. So I just want to say very clearly to America's guys today listening to this, Elon Musk is betting that guys are so scared of the future that they're willing to set aside their own interests and sell the country to him rather than fight for it. He wants America's men, frankly, to be his little bitches. He is betting that men can be duped, to be more afraid of the future, even though there's actually so much promise in this country for men and everybody to build awesome things in the future. But he wants people to be so afraid of the future that you outsource your interests to him. You outsource the future to his deciding, and maybe a couple of those other people. And I actually don't think America's men want to be Elon Musk's little bitches. And I actually don't think men who think of themselves as real men outsource the protection of their families to billionaires and what billionaires want. And I don't think real men who think of themselves in those terms outsource the care of their families to dictators.